All right, great. So the long-awaited synth tutorial, which is a lot of the stuff we've kind of covered already in bits and pieces. This is just putting it all together for you. So we're going to start with a K slider in touchscreen mode. So an integer number box just to see what our key number is. An MTOF to convert from MIDI note number into frequency in hertz. A floating point number box. And as you often see me do, these number boxes aren't functional. They're just displays, so I can keep track of what's going on. And then I'm going to create a bunch of complex waveforms. I'll create a sawtooth wave, a triangle wave, a square wave with the rect. I'll use the rect object for my square wave. And I'll just create a noise source as well. And obviously noise doesn't receive any frequency. Noise just generates white noise. This is the base of the synthesizer voice. And we're going to want to be able to vary the proportion of the individual waveforms. I'm going to do that with a multiply tilde connected to a floating point number box. Like so. And you can just duplicate that for each of the waveforms. So this is kind of something like this is going to be your starting place for any kind of what's often referred to as East Coast synthesis, where you're starting with a harmonically rich waveform and then filtering it down. And then we'll just make a live.gain in a nice horizontal format. I'll do one more multiply tilde. You can never have too many gain stages. I'm not going to do anything with it at the moment except use it as a mixer just to mix my waveforms together. And remember that unlike in regular Macs where you need a plus object to add things together, in MSP when you're dealing with sound, the yellow and black stripy patch cables, connecting them to the same inlet is the same as adding them together. And easy DAC. I'm going to turn this down pretty low and listen to my waveforms. I'll give myself a pitch and there's my sawtooth wave. And what I want to do with these number boxes, just so I don't accidentally push myself into too high amplitude level, I'm gonna set these to a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 1. And you've seen me do this so many times. It's just always good practice to find your minimum and maximum ranges. And so you can hear and see spectroscope. So you can see the different quality of each of the sounds spectrally. Triangle has this sort of comb. A triangle wave produces sort of a, frequencies descending in amplitude with a fixed distance between them. Whereas sawtooth wave produces a denser set of frequencies, and you can see there's two sort of shapes. There's a comb shape and also kind of a rounded shape underneath it. And a square wave produces very sharply divided. And you can hear those differences too. Like there's your square wave is very buzzy. Your triangle wave is rounder. And your sawtooth wave is kind of like a throatier buzz. And of course noise is just noise. And as Bryn has pointed out, we have different flavors of noise we can choose from, but we'll just use, this is white noise. We'll just use white noise for right now. And white noise is distinguished by the fact that it's evenly distributing energy across all of the frequencies. The key thing in synthesis is then how we take this harmonically rich sort of soup of sound and subtract from it or reduce it in order to create an instrumental sound. And again, this is East Coast synthesis thinking. This is, the notion that we start with this hunk of sonic material and carve it into a shape that exists in time. And West Coast thinking is actually more like what we did the last time we met, where we were using those feedback loops to create harmonically rich sounds from simple waves. So like Moog synthesizers are very typical of the East Coast way of thinking. So the very first way in which we want to shape the sound is by shaping its amplitude or its volume over time. And this is why I gave you in the chat this bit of code for the function object, which you've seen before. I just preset it with an ADSR envelope and a few additional settings that are different than if you just, you can create the function just by typing function, and it will create a function that can have as many points as you want, blah, blah, blah. This one is preset so that you can't create additional points in it. It has to be used as an attack, decay, sustain, release envelope, because that's the basic way in which synthesized sounds are shaped in time. They have an attack or a certain amount of time for them to rise. And right now we're talking about volume, so we'll say, a certain amount of time to rise from silence to their maximum volume. In this case, it's 112 milliseconds. A certain amount of time to fall to what's called a sustain level. And then it will stay at the sustain level until the note is released. And that is the release amount. There's one other thing I didn't give you here that's important. I apologize. You also are going to need this subpatcher that I'll put in the chat. This P func to ADSR. And it doesn't have anything complex in it. Here, we'll take a look inside of it. It's just this. But it's a way of translating the output of the function object into the input of the ADSR object, which is what we want to use to create our envelopes in this synthesizer. So I just built this func to ADSR subpatch. So a new object, the ADSR tilde object, which is a way of realizing this shape as an audio signal. And we're going out of the second outlet of the function into the left inlet of the func to ADSR subpatcher, and then we're connecting the left outlet of the patcher to the second inlet of ADSR, third inlet, fourth inlet, fifth inlet. So this just ensures that this graphical representation of this shape is being loaded into this ADSR. And ADSR is driven by a toggle. And if we stick a meter underneath it, we can see this shape executed. So attack, decay, sustain, and then when I uncheck the toggle, release. And we can attach it actually right to this multiply tilde right here. And now this multiply tilde will be driven by this shape. And what we want to do is we want to identify a note on and a note off, which, as we've seen before, you can do by determining if the velocity of the note is greater than 0. Any velocity greater than 0 indicates a note on event, and a velocity of 0 indicates a note off event. And that can be connected directly to the toggle, or you might want to use a send and receive. Send note on. This is arbitrary, call it whatever you want. So now it's going to be the same synthesized sound. So we'll just use a saw wave for the moment. So I'm turning down triangle, rectangle, and noise, and just turning up the saw wave to full. And when I hit the keyboard, the note on event will trigger this envelope and stop at the sustain level. And then when I release the key, the envelope will release. I'm gonna turn it up a bit more. So here we come to the fun part, hopefully, of this tutorial. Hey Leah, glad you joined us. Let's see who else is here. Oh, Dongwei, welcome Dongwei. Great. So the fun part of this tutorial, which is I want to do a visual synthesizer simultaneously with the sound synthesizer. And that's why you can see there's this gray sphere floating in my world, which is this jit.gl.grid shape. And I just want to emphasize this connection that we can make between sound and image. As we've seen over the course of the semesters, objects that seem like sound objects are quite often applicable also to visual things, and objects that seem like visual objects are applicable also to sound. So here we have this ADSR that is giving us a shape that we're interpreting as volume, as amplitude. But if we snapshot it, and I'm going to snapshot it at the frame rate of my jit.world. So I'm going to, this middle outlet of jit.world sends a bang every frame that the video is rendered. So I'm just going to do send render bang. Again, call it whatever you want. I often call it RB for render bang. It's totally arbitrary, and we're putting things that are arbitrary in all capital letters. So this takes the output of my ADSR and just converts it into a normal float. And if I take that and use it to scale my shape here, scale $1, I'll just put it down here, connect that to my grid shape. Now take a look at what happens to the gray ball. It disappears. Why? Because silence equals a scale of 0. And when I hit the note, so this shape is not only controlling the volume or amplitude of the sound, it is also controlling the scale of this jit.gl.grid shape. And you see how simple a translation was. I simply took the signal, used a snapshot tilde to convert it into a float. I'm converting it into a float using the render bang of my jit.world. So meaning I'm converting the signal, which is sending 44,000 numbers a second, but my video is rendering probably at about 60 frames per second. We can see what that is. I'll do a jit.fps GUI here. Yeah, about videos running at about 40 to 50 frames per second. So 40 or 50 times a second, this signal is being converted into a float, and it's becoming the scale of the grid shape. Another simple transformation would be to position it on the screen based on the pitch. So here we have notes between 36 and 83. So I could say scale 36 to 83 to -1 to 1. Meaning if it's note number 36, it'll be on the left side of the screen. If it's note number 83, it'll be on the right side of the screen. And take that into here. And we just do position like so into my grid shape. And so now low notes should be on the left. And as I play notes higher in pitch, the sphere will move to the right. So again, it's a very simple transformation from sound into image. All right, so the other key aspect of synthesis is filtering. And filtering is where you take that harmonically rich waveform, as we looked at, and you remove certain frequencies from it. You either remove the high, bright frequencies, or you remove the low, round frequencies, or you chop frequencies out of the middle. And the most typical filter is what's called a resonant low-pass filter. So let's take a look at that. Oh, by the way, one thing I neglected to mention, this domain is how long this envelope is, this function is in milliseconds. So this represents 1 second. So if I want to zoom in and really fine-tune the front part of this shape, I could change my domain down to say 250 milliseconds. And now I'm only looking at the first quarter second in case I wanted to make like a really tight envelope. And if also I wanted to have a really long sustain, I could make this like 5 seconds. And now I can have a super long sustain. So it's just a zoom, basically. It's a zoom function on your envelope. And just this button right here, see there's a button connected to the right outlet of the function going into the left. This just causes the function object to output its shape, output its envelope every time you change it. So every time I alter it, I want to update the ADSR. So when I drag a point and release it, you'll see that button will fire, which causes the entirety of this shape to be output as a list into the P-Func ADSR, which then populates the ADSR tilde with the updated values. And ordinarily, an object like function and ADSR would probably talk a little bit more easily to each other than they do here, but they're objects, as we often see, they're objects of different generations of Macs. Macs has been around so long, has been in development for so long, that that sometimes these objects are created decades apart from each other. And so even though it would be obvious that they would connect easily to each other, they don't always. But it's not a terrible conversion, as you can see inside P-Func ADSR. It's just a couple of $ arguments to get them to hook up in a nice way. So I'm going to put that up there, and I'm going to label this. This is my amplitude envelope. So the other thing that gets an envelope, well, actually, let's build the filter first. So the filter we'll use is the low res filter. That's a low pass resonant filter, meaning it's going to cut off high frequencies, allow low frequencies to pass through. And at the cutoff frequency, at the point at which it begins to attenuate frequencies, it can amplify. So, here's my sound, and I want to cut off the high, and then the low, at the point, at the knee at which the high frequencies are attenuated, I can create a resonance. I can create an amplification, and this is a very classic synthesizer sound. We'll hear it in a second. So I'm going to take all my sound, pass it through my low pass resonant filter, and I have a frequency, so I can use a K slider to an MTOF, to set my filter cutoff frequency, and then I have a resonance, or an amount of amplification at the cutoff frequency, that I'll set with a float between 0 and 1. These are already set to 0 to 1, so I'll just drag one down. And then you probably want a few more notes in this K slider. Let's do 64. Let's do 72. 72 notes in that keyboard. And then you can hear this. I'll set a nice juicy resonance of like 0.8, and you hear that kind of opening and closing of the sound. That's the filter sweeping. And that throatiness is because of the resonance. If I turn the resonance down to like 0.5, it won't be as throaty. If I turn the resonance up to like 0.95, it's gonna probably oscillate a little bit. Yeah, and if we put in our spectroscope, again, we can see what this is doing to the sound. Right, there's my resonance. As I turn down the resonance, that flattens out. So resonance is creating an amplification at the cutoff frequency. And the high frequencies are attenuated by the filter. And you can see there's a slight resonance even when the resonance is set to 0. But as I turn that resonance up towards 1, it becomes a much more extreme amplification. And we're not hearing this, of course, because our envelope is closed at the moment. You get really wide, broad range of sounds with that. But that's just step 1. Step 2 is making that filter move. And that's what's going to really give characters to the sound. That's where you can get vocal-sounding sounds, horn-like sounds, drum-like sounds by moving that filter in time. So we'll use another ADSR. Let me get this one into a sort of more normal setting. And I'll take this entire structure and duplicate it here to create our filter envelope. And this is, you're pretty much going to see this in every synthesizer. There's going to be a sound generator, an amplitude envelope, and a filter envelope. Let's do a little bit of work on our K slider here. I'm going to use the capture object with the list out. Attribute set to 1. I want a clear message that I send to both the capture and the K slider. I want to be in polyphonic mode on this. Polyphonic. I want to dump it. I want to dump the contents of the capture every time a new note is entered. And then I'm just going to extract the minimum and maximum values from the list of notes. And this will just allow me to select a range of notes, or even just select 2 individual notes and get the low note and the high note. So I've selected 55 and 84. But if I clear it, I can also drag over notes. So I've selected notes 59 through 81. And if I want to extend the range, I can just click up here, and now the range is 59 to 88. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want my filter to change frequency over time. So this filter envelope isn't changing the amount of filtering, and it's not changing the volume of filtering, and it's not changing the resonance. It's changing the actual cutoff frequency. It's sweeping the cutoff frequency through the sound. So I'm going to MTOF both of these note numbers. Just some floating point number boxes so I can see. And so all we need to do now is take the output of our ADSR, which is a value between 0 and 1, and we'll scale it. 0 to 1 becomes whatever to whatever.
A few moments later.
And try it again. There we go. That's what we want to hear. So you hear that wow, that's the filter envelope. And depending on where we set it, we're going to get a different quality. And also its shape is going to determine the quality. So here it's going to slowly rise up and then slowly fall down. Or slowly rise up and quickly fall down. Quickly rise up and slightly less quickly fall down. So you can hear that the sound is starting to have more character. And of course we're using a very, very high resonance here. If we use a less high resonance, it will have less of a tangy quality to it. So there I'm getting almost a plucked sound. So that's basic parts of your synthesizer. And then getting back to the visual idea, how are we going to represent this filter change? We might say, okay, let's represent it with color. And since we're using a jit.gl.material, we don't modify the color of the grid shape directly. We use the diffuse color of the material, which is matte diffuse. Stands for diffuse color of the material. And as we're familiar with doing when we're dealing with color, we want to take a look at a multi-number float. And we'll just, now we do need to snapshot again. We'll snapshot the output of our ADSR with our render bang. And do something like, let's see. I'll make the filter cut off the redness of the color, and then I will make the green and the blue the opposite of the redness. So I'm going to do 1 minus the redness, which would be exclamation mark minus means 1 minus. So 1 minus the redness. And let's see what that looks like. Right, so when the filter is open, it's red, and when it's closed, it's teal. And we can see the closure of that filter and hear it. Let's give it some more resonance so it's a little bit clearer. And if we want a slow filter attack, slower even. Okay, so that gives us a start. That gives us a basic synthesizer structure and a simple way to visualize those sounds.